things I'm going to tell you is I'm still developing your online learning. My manager, who's keeping track of me, is the perfectionist from hell, which I love most of the time. So there's a few little things I need to do. But in your task sheet and in your timelines, what I've said is when you get a familiar task, I want you doing that at home so that you maximise your learning and your productivity. The other thing I was just talking about with Kat is if you are really moving ahead well, I encourage you to use the facilities to either double up and do a second hat or work on projects that you want to do so that you're really getting the best of your time. Now, you can see here I showed you this last week, and this is our sideband. So you've blocked your tip and you've put your centre front mark on, and you've cut down to, Renee, you've cut down to you've left a seam allowance of between 1 and 1.5 centimetres. So then you've got that very neat thing, set that aside. And now we're going to make this, which is going to go, sorry, I'll move you back a bit there, Renee, so you can see. Can you see? No, I'll aim you down. That's good. And this is the cylinder that we're going to make, and that's going to slip down over, and we're going to block this on your band. And if I get a piece of this will do me for now. If I get a piece of ribbon or a bit of calico, I can draw this in because it's on the bias. Can you see that? So it's coming down in onto the hat, and then I can slip stitch that. Can you see it? Yeah. There you go. You can slip stitch that onto the crown. There's a couple of ways of doing it, and we're not going to worry about that too much now. But the first thing we need to do is get the measurements to make this little baby. So you can see this one's tapering a little bit, and so we could make it this measurement and stretch it out, or we could make it this measurement and draw it in, but I'm always for the middle part. So I'm actually just going to measure halfway down so that I can have the circumference. I'll draw it in a little bit here and stretch it out a little bit there. So the circumference in this case was 54, so there's my cylinder, and it's going to be 54 centimetres. So that's the first thing that you each need to do, is work out where you're going to do your cylinder, your measurement, and then work that out. The next measurement you're going to need is the depth. So I've got my seam, which is going to start here, just as the curve goes, and then I'm going to go down to here, and I'm just going to put a little pinning allowance underneath. So I'm going to use, in my case, the full height, but you might say, oh well, I only need half of that, so don't waste your materials, just measure off what you need, but make sure that you include about 1.5 centimetres seam pinning allowance. And also, if you want to, it can be folded up inside, and you can do a hat without an actual band as well, which can be quite nice. In this instance, it's 14 centimetres. So the height plus the pinning allowance is 14. Now, let's just say, for argument's sake, this is 14 centimetres high. How many centimetres will this have to be? Going up, coming back.
32.
Hey?
28. Including seam allowance?
28. Seam allowance on both sides. So effectively you've got to double this. So it's 14 plus the other 14 so that you can fold it down inside. So, and the seam is going around like that, okay? So the shape that is, when it's lying flat, sorry, I know it's going to get confusing. I'm going to be running around doing firefighting after this is over. But so you know, the shape that you're going to do is, step 1, cut off the selvage. Throw it away, okay, because that ain't going to be useful for anything. Now, we're going to, if you were doing what I said last week and you did a little staircase of tip measurements, then you'll have already something that's already looking like a bias line, right? So we need to have the 54 centimetres here. So that's my circumference, or 54. And you can add or not add the seam allowance, plus 2 centimetres, let's say, for the seam allowance. So I'll just write SA there. You can put that in your notes so that you've got that skill there. And so we've got our straight grain line there. Now we've worked out it's 14 plus 14, so it's going to be 28 across here. Can you see, is that on the straight grain or on the bias of our fabric?
Yeah, bias.
It's on the bias, well spotted. Can everyone see that? So if I see anybody measuring up this way, I will quietly improve your measuring position. So that ain't a measuring, but that is a cutting. So when you've got that right, you cut along the straight grain until you get to your 28, and then you cut up on the bias. Now, while I was ferreting around in here, I found my bias finder. So you can use this if you want to get a nice bias line. There is another way you can do it. Can I borrow a piece of your cinema? Thank you. If you come in and have a close look, Denny, I'll show you. Does everyone know that if you do the edge at the bottom up and make it sit so you can see the cinema matching, that'll find you a true bias, perfect bias. It probably is in using the set square and probably better finish. So then you can just press that with your thumb and then you can cut along that line. Okay, so I'm going to put a dotted line down here. What does that represent?
Where you fold it in half.
That's exactly right. That's going to be where I fold it. If I wanted to, I can have just 2 thicknesses, and that's going to be you Sunday. If anybody wants to have it a bit thicker, they can just do the same again. So just continue up here, unroll a bit more, go up into that roll up, and there's my little folded line, and that measurement will be the same. Now, because I know that there's one person in this group who may make a mistake, I'm going to ask you to do that cutting plan in your notebook with the actual measurements. When you've done that, I want you to get your tailor's chalk or pins or whatever you need to, and I want you to mark it out on your cinema. So you might want to press the cinema before you mark it out, so it's not going to want to roll up and drive you crazy. And then when you've done that, I will say, yes, you're doing it right, and then off you go with your scissors. Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah, what's the seam allowance on the circumference?
You can do 1 centimetre on each end. And then you've got your seam allowance on your circumference, and you've got your pinning allowance on the depth. Okay, good question. What was your question, Georgia?
Because this is really tiny,
Yeah.
how do I do it the exact same way, just a really small?
No, you're doing the crown, not the
Yeah.
brim.
Yeah, I know, but because the crown is small.
Oh, if